Good day, friends. Welcome to Marriage Encounter. We are delighted again to be with you. We want to thank those of you who have given positive feedback and a review to the program we last shared. We are discussing this general broad topic of boundaries. Just to say that it is meaningful to us when you send a note, when you send a WhatsApp, when you say, hey, listen, I listened to Marriage Encounter and I've been blessed. We like the encouragement. Definitely. And we appreciate it. We thought we would say that. Doc, good day.
Good day, friends. Again, it's just exciting to be on Marriage Encounter with you. We appreciate all of the comments, as Dr. Greene has said. And in the chat, we know people are making very interesting comments as we journey. So we really appreciate that. It helps us to focus and gives us some ideas of things that we may need to cover in the future. So keep doing that, and we're looking forward for another exciting day today.
Well, we want to begin with a word of prayer, shall we? Eternal Father and our God, we pray that you will be with us as we share with our friends, those who are viewing via our YouTube channel, those who are listening via Second Advent Radio or its streaming platforms. We pray that the information we present today will prove meaningful in helping to build solid, strong relationships. Amen. Thank you for hearing and answering. Guide and direct the proceedings in your precious name. Amen.
Amen. Beautiful.
Dr. Braithwaite, last week we spoke about boundaries. We sort of gave an overview. We said that boundaries, in its basic forms, are property demarcators. Yes. Right? And applying that to relationships, to marriage, we said that individuals in the marriage must know what is theirs.
That's right.
Right? We made a distinction that we're not talking about material things.
Correct.
You know, you own all material things in common, but we are talking about attitudes, feelings, etc. We want to go into that in a little more detail today, in terms of boundaries, the things that we have to own. First, last week we mentioned that the whole matter of ownership is important. And I just want to highlight one thing here, that in relationships, ownership is also not just about saying I have more than you. It's really about taking responsibility, which is what we want to zero in on today.
Right.
When we talk about responsibility, we're saying that there are some things that I must recognize this is my role.
Yes. Yes. So you have to acknowledge this is me, this is my role, this is how I function, this is my attitude towards certain things. And in previous programs, when we did material for the radio, we also acknowledge that there are things that sort of shape us into who we are. And I'm making that point because when you look at your attitudes, when we look at, the way that we behave, our behaviors, we have to understand that it's coming from somewhere. And we can take responsibility for that.
Yeah, that's right. Now, when we say take responsibility, we are acknowledging the fact that a marriage doesn't just happen. One has to put in hard work in the relationship. One has to invest, we used that term last week, in the relationship. I must want this thing to work. And it can't be that my spouse is doing all the hard work and I'm not doing any of the hard work. I must put in if I'm going to get out. So each of us must know. There are times in relationships when in premarital counseling we talk about roles and responsibilities. Who is responsible for what? Similarly, as the marriage grows, as the marriage develops, we must recognize that there are some things that can never belong to my spouse, will always belong to me, and we want to identify some of those things today.
So what are some of the things that you have to take responsibility for that belong to you? So we're talking about feelings, for instance, how you feel about things. That's your feelings. You can't determine or demand that your spouse is responsible for your feelings. You are always responsible for your feelings. Another example.
But before you go to another example, Doc, because that's a very interesting one. I mean,
all right.
Now we are married.
Yes.
We have one television. My wife wants to watch, let's say, whatever the program is. You know.
On life, something on Lifetime.
On Lifetime.
Right.
All right. The ladies like to do that. Yeah. I want to watch sports.
Yes.
But the sports event that I want to watch is at the same time that the Lifetime program is on. And my wife consistently has preference. Because she gets home before me, she turns on the television and she may say, hey, I turn on the television. It's my time now.
Leave it, yeah.
You know? And I begin to feel upset.
Right.
2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 months, a whole year, I'm now upset.
Right.
Are you saying, therefore, that I must take responsibility for my feeling? You know, I feel upset.
Right.
What if I say, it's my wife that made me feel upset?
Well, absolutely not. So the point is that that feeling that you have of being upset is yours. It is your feeling. I mean, you know, you can't blame her for the feeling that you have. Now, at the end of the day, as you've highlighted, Doc, you indicated that, you know, she got home early, always turned on the TV, and then it stays there. But the feeling of being upset is something that happens in you that you need to take responsibility for, and then determine, why do I feel this way?
You know, Doc, I stopped you because I wanted us to highlight this.
Appreciate it.
You know, because you see, if I don't understand that this is my feeling, if I don't know emotionally what's going on with me, and I keep shifting that to my spouse, that issue will never be solved.
There you go.
You know, when we do conflict resolution, we talk about understanding the emotional component of the conflict. How does it affect me? What's going on with me? I must know how I'm feeling, you know, and own that and take responsibility for how I feel. If I feel angry, I must be willing to say or to admit that I am feeling angry. Now, that's the important first step.
So one of the greater challenges in this regard, as we relate to feelings, Doc, is the fact that many people, when they do have that feeling, as we're using, of anger, they tend to blame the other person and say, you are the reason. Whereas the reality is that the feeling that you have is really your feeling. Taking ownership of that feeling is so critical, and then recognizing that you can begin to address it. That is the point at which change can begin to happen. But until you own it, you're going to have that difficulty of trying to blame somebody else for what's going on with you.
You know, what typically happens is that we blame our spouse for the feeling, and then we react to it. So I may decide, you know what, you want to watch a television, I feel upset with you, I'm not going to talk to you.
Right.
I'm going to buy a television.
Right.
And rather than discussing the matter with you,
right,
I go and I buy a television, and now where do I put it?
Right.
So that leads to another problem. You know, if I have a spare bedroom, I may put it in the spare bedroom, and then we have another issue.
Well, exactly. I was just going to say, look at what begins to happen here.
Precisely.
The moments that you would generally spend communing together, sharing together, and enjoying time together, you now start a process of separation, Doc.
Yeah.
Where down the road, you know, that can lead to significant challenges to your relationship.
And look at what happens now. If you own your feeling, and you can communicate that to your spouse, and you can say, sweetheart, when you consistently spend all the time watching your favorite program, and I don't get a chance to watch my favorite program, I feel that you are unreasonable.
Right.
Now I'm communicating that to my spouse.
Right.
I'm taking ownership for my feeling. I'm sharing the behavior that my spouse is engaged in, and I'm reacting to how her behavior makes me feel.
Yep.
I'm not blaming her for anything. I'm saying, this is how I feel when you do that. That can lead into a discussion, and so my spouse may say, I didn't realize that my behavior was impacting you like that.
There you go.
Well, we can do something about it.
So and you know, we've seen another dynamic here, because one of the other things that we have to take responsibility for is behavior. And as you mentioned, as she said, I didn't realize my behavior was causing this. She is at that point taking responsibility for
her behavior,
which is
exactly.
which is powerful and important in the process. You know, so again, you know, so critical that you engage in that discussion. And as you mentioned, Doc, what happens a lot of times, people don't take responsibilities, and so they begin to engage in actions that become very detrimental to the long-term survival of a relationship.
You know, I don't know that we can overemphasize this matter of not blaming, Doc. You know, we are quick to say it's her fault, it's his fault. And the other person is going to say, I did this because you did that. You know, that's immaturity. We're saying take responsibility for your own feelings, your own behavior. Another one is your attitude.
Attitudes, yes.
You know, attitude is a big thing. You know, there's a lot that is said these days about attitude. But if you do not have an attitude of goodwill for your relationship. You know, to go back to the illustration, if because my wife is, as we say, hogging the television and not giving me the opportunity to enjoy my favorite program, then I begin to dislike my spouse, or I begin to withdraw, or I begin not to want to communicate with my spouse.
Yes.
That attitude is not building the relationship.
No.
It's taken away from the relationship.
Absolutely. So you are, as we indicated, you're now building an environment that is going to cause disruption in the normal flow of your relationship. And as I mentioned before, Doc, that the long-term effect of that is deleterious. It's harmful to the success of your relationship. So really taking responsibility, Doc. You know, I wanted to go back because just a little bit to where we were in relationship to some of the actions that people engage in when somebody's doing something that they may not be too excited about. You know, and you have situations where a person, in the example of the TV, I just have to go back there a little bit. A person may choose to you know, turn off the internet because, you know, they don't want the other person to do what they're doing. But rather than addressing the issue and addressing the feeling, they engage in actions that become extremely harmful. They take on attitudes, as you mentioned, no longer having goodwill for the relationship. So you decide now all of a sudden, you know, I am not gonna engage in spending time with my spouse. I'm gonna withdraw my time, so to speak, so that in order to prove some kind of point. But you know, those actions are just destroying your relationship.
And look at what happens, Doc. The relationship gets to the point where it breaks down so much that they come into your office or come into my office for counseling.
Right.
And you're asking the couple, what's wrong?
Right.
And, you know, one person, they may be saying, well, we don't talk to each other anymore.
Right.
Well, why don't you talk to each other anymore? Oh, my husband is selfish. Oh, well, why are you selfish? Well, my wife doesn't spend time with me. Well, why don't you spend time with him? Because he's not nice. And see what's going on? We're blaming one another.
Nobody's taking responsibility.
We're blaming one another. We are not taking responsibility for our feelings, for our behavior, for our actions.
Yes.
And if we take responsibility, like I said before, when you are feeling upset with your spouse, listen, do understand that that's your feeling. You are responsible for how you feel. You can say, do I really want to feel upset with my spouse? Is this a good thing or not? And you can decide how you're going to treat your upsetness with your spouse. You can say, well, let me go to my wife and say, honey, right now, I'm feeling a little bit upset with you.
Right.
Give me a hug.
Right.
You know, that can make a big difference.
There you go. I mean, you know, amazingly, you know, as we look at this, and you've highlighted something here that is so important. How do you address your feeling? Now, the feeling that you have is a real feeling. It's an emotion. We get upset. We feel angry. We feel hurt. There's nothing in itself wrong with the feeling, but how you respond to that feeling is the difference. Now, amazingly, as you mentioned, Doc, I can be upset, but as I go to my spouse to address what's going on with me, I can choose to dispose of that feeling in a positive way. And so it may be so, just to be real with us today, it may be so anti your feeling to ask your spouse for a hug at the moment when you're feeling upset. You have to make a choice to do that.
Well, that's another thing that we're responsible for,
yes,
our choices.
Yeah,
right?
you have to make a choice. You can go to your spouse and say, sweetheart, I'm upset with you, but give me a hug. And amazingly, that hug can dissipate the tension in that scenario in such a major way that it opens the door for good, solid communication.
What I'm thinking about right now is a statement that Stephen Covey made in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Families.
Okay.
And he spoke about habit number 1 being proactive.
Proactive.
And he made a point that between the stimulus and the reaction, there's a space, there's what we call a pause. So when I realize that, my spouse's behavior is making me angry, and I own that anger, I must now say to myself, what am I going to do with this?
That's right.
How do I react?
How do I choose?
How do I react? How do I choose? What am I going to do? That's my choice. I also have to take responsibility, not just for my feelings, but for my actions, my choices. And I can determine whether I'm going to be reactive or I'm going to be proactive.
Yeah.
I can say, you know what, I'm going to, as you mentioned earlier, Doc, I'm going to go and I'm going to disconnect the internet.
Yes.
Or I'm going to deliberately, I'm responsible for paying the bills because I live next door to the utility
company.
Whatever it is company. Yeah. And I'm going to deliberately forget to pay the bills so that I can disconnect it so that my spouse can know. I can think all these kinds of things.
Right.
Or I can determine, let me be proactive. Let me go and, as we shared, say, honey, I'm feeling a little down. Give me a hug.
Right.
I say, why are you feeling down?
Right.
After you hug me, I'll tell you.
Right. Exactly.
We
choices.
We can exercise the power of choice. That's something we have to take responsibility for.
So some other authors, speak to that issue that you spoke about with respect to Covey in terms of the ability to make a cognitive decision versus an emotional decision. So at the moment when your wife is there watching the TV and you want to watch it and there's a little argument ensuing, you can respond emotionally. And as you mentioned, same thing, go and plug out. Mm-hmm. Or you can take a moment to make a cognitive response where you're saying, let me think about this for a minute and let me see what my action, I'm taking responsibility now, what the action of plugging out the TV or taking off the internet will actually do for our overall relationship. I realize that's not a good option. I'm making a choice, I'm making a decision to do something positive for our relationship. And that in itself is taking responsibility.
And friends, we're not trying to oversimplify the issues.
Right.
These are real life situations. It could be the other way around. The husband is watching his sports and his wife calls him to do something and he says, I'm coming, but he's not leaving.
He never arrived.
And she calls again and he says, I'm coming, and he never comes. Now, wife can become angry, and she gets so angry. And
I hope you're not guilty of that one, Doc.
I'm not really too much of a television person, so I wouldn't be there. But she can become so angry that, and if she doesn't control her anger, again, taking responsibility for your feelings and your choices and your actions, she may go and she may disconnect the television, just unplug it.
Doc, we've seen some TVs that have been damaged.
Yeah, exactly. And this is why we're making the point that we have to take responsibility.
Yes.
So understand how you're feeling. And if you know that you're angry, then also, how am I going to treat my anger?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So there are some other areas where we need to take responsibility for. We spoke about feelings, attitudes, behaviors. We have choices. We spoke to that. Limits is also another area.
That's a big one, Doc.
That's a big one.
That's a very big one.
Taking responsibility for limits. And, that can go from, how much of the dessert that you decide to eat when the dessert is for everybody, to how late you stay out at night.
Yeah, when we talk about limits, we're talking about reasonableness.
Yes.
You know, I mean, it's a huge topic, and we will eventually come back to it.
Yeah.
But again, when we say take responsibility, because just to say, Doc, limits also has to do not just with restraining yourself from not eating all of the dessert,
Right.
not just restraining yourself from staying out all night playing dominoes,
Right.
but also understanding when you are not reasonable with your spouse. So you may want to engage in sexual activity when your spouse had a rough, hard, long day.
Yep.
So we're talking about taking responsibility for your limits likewise.
Yeah. So another big area, and as you mentioned, Doc, we'll discuss more. We can also speak about desires. Desires in terms of you kind of touched it earlier, sexual desires too, and how do I take responsibility for my own sexual desires? Thoughts. Wow.
And the matter of thoughts.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, you have to take responsibility for this. Because you cannot expect that your spouse will take responsibility for your thoughts. But there are some individuals who will dare to say, well, if my spouse didn't treat me the way a little better, if she had treated me a little better, I would not be thinking about this. So some individuals allow their thoughts to go overboard and blame their spouses. Your spouse can never think for you.
Doc, people say, you're the one that made me think this way.
Next week and beyond, Doc, as we go into the details of some of these areas about how we exercise the whole concept of boundaries, we really want to ask those of you who are viewing, those of you who are listening, to tune in, because it is important that we get a hold of these very important things.
Very important.
We talk about values and talents and love. These are things that you must own. And what we are saying in part is that you cannot afford to say, I will only do this if my spouse does that. You can change your relationship with or without your spouse.
Right. So, taking responsibility for your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors, your actions, all of these things are so critical and so crucial for the success of your relationship in the long term. And for us just to have this discussion, Doc, is so enlightening, I think, because a number of persons would go through life, amble through life sometimes, not aware of some of these realities, not aware that it's essential to have boundaries in your relationship as it relates to these emotions, to these thoughts, to these feelings, and place them in their proper perspective as you relate to your spouse on a daily basis. Understand that, Doc, we live every day, and so we will encounter these realities every single day.
I think as we wrap up, Doc, I want to make reference to, I want to quote Cloud and Townsend with some restatements about responsibility in your marriage. In their book, Boundaries in Marriage, I think that's what it is. Yeah, they say here that responsibility tells us we are the ones who must work through our feelings and learn how to feel differently. Now, that's big.
How to.
We must learn how to feel differently.
I want to speak to that a little bit because, time is so short. Time always seems to run out so quickly.
We can always continue next week.
I don't know. But just quickly, taking responsibility for your feelings is a big deal because, as I mentioned, I believe last week, you need to know why you feel the way you feel about something. And that sometimes carries you back into your childhood. It carries you sometimes back to things that have happened to you in the past. Why do you feel angry when you see, somebody, ill-treating an animal, all right? You may have had experiences in your past, and, this is just an example, where somebody ill-treated your favorite pet, and you bring that hurt down through the years, and you see it again, and it evokes the same anger. you need to understand, why do I have anger when I see something like that happening?
You know, you're raising such an important issue, Doc, and we don't have time to go into all of it. I think we can pick it up right here next week.
Yeah, sure.
Because that's something that we really do need to expand on as we talk about boundaries. Because it is really true that, you know, our past impacts our present.
Yes.
And some persons, if we don't begin to take responsibility and to consider the question that you're saying there, why am I feeling this way?
Yes.
Then they may never get out of it.
There you go.
But it appears that our time
has expired.
Is running away. Again, we want to say as we close today that we do appreciate hearing from you, and we are asking, of course, if you're watching via our YouTube channel, you can always write something in the chat there, but we would like you to send us an email, and we have decided that we're going to make it easy. Rather than you remembering who to send an email to, just send an email to marriageencounter@slcadventist.org. marriageencounter@slcadventist.org. So, Doc, that's all the time we have for today.
Until next time, folks.
That's right. We will see you next week. May God bless you. Enjoy.